When my mother slammed the front door in my face, her words kept ringing in my ears. "I'm done with you." At 22, suitcase at my feet, I stood on the porch and watched the life I knew carry on inside without me. Through the curtain window, my sister Cassandra laughed with our parents, a sound that felt like a foreign broadcast from a world that had never included me. Back then, I believed their verdict. I was a disappointment, plain, unremarkable, unworthy of their approval. Nashville had been the backdrop for our family's expectations. Appearances mattered, achievements were currency, and conformity kept the social engine humming. My parents ran a successful small business, and they'd mapped out the future for both daughters: doctors, lawyers, trophy kids who reflected well on the family name. Cassandra fitted the mold with the kind of effortless charm that made people beam with pride. I did not. When I declared a design major, it felt like saying I wanted a different kind of life. To them, it was a betrayal. "Designers don't do real work," my father said flatly. My mother kept score with comparisons, the kind that leaves you measuring your value against someone else's light until you're exhausted. The pressure didn't break me in a moment. It wore me down in layers. Calls home became interrogations. Report cards weren't celebrations. They were auditions. When my mental health collapsed into anxiety and depression, their response was to minimize and to punish. I stopped going to classes, stopped eating on a schedule, stopped answering the phone. Leaving college felt less like surrender than a last choked-through breath, a way to keep going when everything else had become unbearable. They reacted by exiling me. They cut off support, changed the locks on whatever small mercy remained, and made it clear I could not come back. Homeless for a while, couch surfing, stuffing shifts between temp jobs, I learned hunger and humiliation as disciplines. But the month of survival also became my forge. I refused to let their judgment define my story. I taught myself programs from tutorials, built experiments into portfolios, took on small clients who needed logos and flyers. I slept less, worked more, and saved every cent. Years later, that kid on the porch would feel like a stranger. But the roots of what I became started that night, in humiliation, stubbornness, and the decision to make my life by my own hands. Then 5 years later, an unexpected invitation arrived, and everything nudged toward collision. When the message popped up on my phone, an invite to Cassandra's graduation celebration, I did something I hadn't done in years. I paused. For half a decade, I had edited out the family chapter of my life. I'd changed numbers, moved across town, built a life measured by invoices rather than approval. Why go back now? The question sat with me like an ache. Part of me wanted to stay away entirely. Another part wanted to stand in the room and show them what their rejection had fueled. Preparing felt oddly intimate. I wasn't dressing to impress them. I wanted my reflection to match the woman I had become. Careful, composed, tested by hardship, and tempered by persistence. The black dress I chose was intentionally simple, not flashy, but deliberate, a small ritual of reclamation. I had earned every thread of it. When I stepped into the venue that evening, chandeliers, a quartet in the corner, a cascade of people bathing in polite congratulations, something tightened and softened at once. This was their world. Polished, curated, the kind of place where image was law. I drifted through the crowd like a shadow until Professor Howard appeared, the one person from my college days who had believed in my work. His warmth was a surprise anchor. He had taught me when I still thought the classroom could save me. Hearing him say he'd always seen potential felt like a small repair to the wounds of abandonment. We chatted, and for a moment, I let myself be just a person reconnecting with a mentor. But the evening's gloss cracked quickly. Overheard conversations revealed how carefully my parents had rearranged the truth for public consumption. Stories about me working abroad, proud boasts of both daughters' successes, casual lies that read like ad copy. They had matured the fiction that I was thriving somewhere convenient while refusing to accept me in reality. The realization felt corrosive. They wanted the credit of success without the responsibility of parenting. Then, by the dessert table, a voice I recognized introduced me to Dr. Gregory, the dean of the medical school, a potential client. The irony wasn't lost. Here, in the room where my family performed their narrative, an actual professional opportunity landed in my lap because of my work, not their fabricated version of it. It felt like proof that I'd been building something real all along. As the evening unfolded, I overheard something that changed the air in the room, a private conversation that revealed my family's plans were not only about image, but about money. They had been plotting to claim my inheritance, operating under the assumption that my absence meant forfeiture. The casual cruelty of that calculus made my skin go cold. I started recording, because you never want to face a family that lies about you without evidence. I should have left then. Instead, I stayed, weaponizing attention into evidence. I recorded a phone call where Cassandra and my mother spoke in tones I'd heard before, practiced, casual, like plotting over brunch. They talked about how my disappearance made it convenient to adjust the books and claims. The voice on the other end laughed about how fortunate they were that the inconvenient daughter had faded away. Those laughs landed like blows. The discovery rewired my intentions. This was not merely about pride or pretending. It was an active scheme to claim a legacy that by every legal and moral measure belonged to me. Anger uncoiled into a cautious strategy. I sent one terse text to Jordan, my business partner, and his answer landed like a lifeline. Meet me tomorrow. Don't confront them now. He was right. I needed counsel that wasn't fueled by rage alone. But fate has its sense of drama. My father rose to make a speech and, with perfunctory warmth, announced a family congratulation for both daughters. He told the room I was overseas and busy, a line practiced enough to make my presence seem implausible. People nodded. Their faces were polite clamshells. It was infuriating and grotesque the way truth could be bent into applause. When Professor Howard recognized me and his confusion edged into alarm, the charade began to unravel. A dean approached, and suddenly a new possibility appeared. The very institution my sister had graduated from needed a website redesign. Dr. Gregory asked if I'd consider the project. There it was, an opening into the world I'd been building without their consent. But the professional moment was overlaid with the personal's uglier contours. I had recorded my sister. I had evidence that my family had been discussing my exclusion and the trust fund. The math of what to do with that recording played in my head, shifting between revenge and redress. I tested the waters with the men who'd known me before the exile. Professor Howard's eyes reflected both guilt and resolve. He'd seen how I'd been dismissed. When I told Dr. Gregory who I was and why I'd been absent, he listened with that rare blend of curiosity and sympathy. His response was measured. Professionals can and should judge by competence, not gossip. That counsel steadied me. Yet the encounter made one thing clear. What my family had done was not a private failing. It had potential legal consequences. So I made a decision that felt apocalyptic and necessary. I would not let this go unchallenged. I gathered my proof, documents tucked away for years, the recording, witnesses, and with Jordan's calm insistence, we began to make calls that would change how the night ended. It was terrifying. It was also the first time in 5 years I felt like the author of my destiny rather than a passive character in someone else's narrative. By evening's end, the story I had been living in silence was about to be told out loud.
The confrontation happened in a blur. What began as a quiet exchange with mentors turned into a public exposure as I stepped forward to name the pattern of lies. My father's polished speech, his tidy mythology of familial pride, shattered when I announced I was the daughter he just described as overseas. The gasps were immediate. Faces turned. Where they had been polite masks, there were now visible fractures. Professor Howard stood with me, a quiet witness to a longer arc of neglect. Dr. Gregory's eyes held the practical concern of a man mindful of reputations and responsibilities. My parents' practiced composure dissolved into frantic denial. Words that had been banished from my life, abandonment, disownment, betrayal, were now in the open. Cassandra's reaction was the sharpest. She spat out the old lines about instability and drama, only to be met with my calm recounting of depressed years and their refusal to help. Evidence matters, so I played the recording. Her voice discussed forfeiture and the lawyer's assurance that my absence made their claim easier. The mood shifted toward incredulity, and then toward a reckoning. People who'd come for a celebration found themselves embroiled in a family rupture that read like a moral scandal. Friends of my parents who once nodded along to their narratives now exchanged looks that said as much as any verdict. At my side, Jordan produced our agency's portfolio on his tablet and let the work speak. Project after project scrolled by. Sites, brands, campaigns, the visual proof of a life reconstructed from scratch. It was a paradox. The same people who wanted credit for my existence had simultaneously been erasing me. The crowd's sympathy began to tilt. Old alliances are fragile when truth pierces illusion. When the lawyer I'd contacted arrived in the lobby, a practical tone entered the scene. Documents, offers, consequences. Overnight strategy was replaced by morning motions. I wanted 3 things: the trust funds secured on legal terms, a signed renunciation of any claim, and a full stop to their use of my name for social polish. I didn't want to ruin them for the sake of ruin. I wanted to remove their power to exploit me again. They agreed, under pressure, to a meeting with a lawyer. It felt surreal to watch them sign papers that severed their access to something they'd tried to take. Their signatures were a covenant of separation. No future claims, no contact unless I choose to initiate it, and a legal barrier to their lies about me. When the documents were signed, I felt lighter than I'd imagined possible. It wasn't triumph in the tabloid sense. It was quiet, legal finality. The fallout followed. Their social circle fractured as whisper networks did what whispers do. My father's business endured tremors as partners reevaluated ties. Cassandra's career faced scrutiny. Ethics and character are, in medicine, a fragile currency. For me, the aftermath was not vengeance, but reallocation. Energy spent on self-preservation could now be reinvested in the life I'd built from scratch. With the legal dust settling, an unexpected professional opportunity sealed the chapter, but it also posed new choices. In the week that followed, 2 things happened almost simultaneously. The trust fund transfer moved through. Funds my grandmother had set aside were released into my control. At the same time, Dr. Gregory formalized his offer. The medical school engagement was mine on terms of merit. It was a peculiarly clean counterpoint. The world had given me both financial breathing room and the kind of institutional validation I'd never sought in my parents' image, but had nonetheless earned. I moved through those weeks with an odd mixture of relief and reflection. The money mattered for practical reasons. It meant choices without scarcity. But what surprised me most was how small the sum of other people's approval suddenly felt. For years, I had been driven by a desire to prove myself to a family who didn't want me. Now I realized the more effective proof was simply living well. The agency thrived. Clients came not because of theatrics, but because of craft. The Dean's Project opened doors to other educational institutions and nonprofit work. My team grew. I hired slowly and intentionally, building a staff that felt like a chosen family rather than an obligation. There were quieter victories too. Evenings when I could eat without checking the bank balance. Mornings when the thought of my past didn't tighten my chest. I found friendships that were mutual and steady. People who celebrated without ledgering my mistakes against me. The narrative I'd carried for half a decade, broken child, ashamed failure, began to recede beneath new storylines. Entrepreneur, creative leader, survivor. As for my parents, the collapse of their social standing was not the dramatic purge I'd once fantasized about. Life continued in smaller rhythms. They retreated from the clubs and alliances that had once buoyed them. My father's business relationships thinned. Cassandra's career faced scrutiny. Ethics and character are, in medicine, a fragile currency. For me, what I gained was wider than money or contracts. I learned to define family for myself. I learned that boundaries could be enforced with paper and voice, that protection and prosperity need not negate compassion, but could coexist with a refusal to be reused. At my agency's office one afternoon, I stood by a window, watching the city breathe. My phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Gregory confirming the timeline for the redesign. I smiled because the work mattered, because I'd built something that could outlast any one moment of drama. If there's a moral, it's less tidy than revenge and softer than vindication. The truest victory was not in dismantling a false image of me or in taking back money. It was in becoming the person who could do both without being consumed by either. I had stopped running. I had learned to live. And when the past tried to show up, I no longer rushed to answer, because I had already become the person I was meant to be.